Today's video is sponsored by Raid Shadow Legends. War. What is it good for? Well, some will answer you with absolutely nothing, others will say for increasing the amount of land and resources you have. And honestly, the opinion changes whether or not you're on the winning or the losing side of said war. But regardless of what war might actually be good for, one thing does seem to come out of every single war. And that's heroes. People who rose above the call of duty and now live in the history books as some of the greatest heroes of all time. And while obviously this applies to the real world, it also very much applies to the anime world. At least any anime world where there's been a war. And I'd argue that Naruto has probably had more wars in its existence than any other anime out there. How many other anime do you know of that had 4 world wars? In like 100 years too. But this raises the very logical question, if we've had all of these wars, who are the individual heroes of said wars? Who are the people who rose above the call of duty in these great Shinobi world wars? And most importantly, how did they cement their names in the history books forever? Well, that's a question we're hoping to explore today, because today we're doing a little bit of a history lesson. Yes, that's right, because today we're not only going to be talking about the Shinobi World Wars, but who the heroes of each one were. So sit back, relax, and get your learning caps on, because today we're doing a fictional history lesson. But before I get to teaching you about anything, guys, please, for me, like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell. And if you love learning about the history of anime universes and you want to learn about more history and more anime universes, you're gonna love my other channel, The Weeb Commander, where instead of talking about Naruto or Boruto, I talk about any other anime. Fun little thing happening with the Weeb Commander right now. I found a YouTube page, a Spanish-speaking YouTube page called Tensei YT, who's apparently taking all of my Weeb Commander videos and translating them into Spanish and then taking them as their own content. They're also doing this to other YouTubers. So if you want to follow the Weeb Commander and also want to help me out a little bit, maybe report them. That'd be awesome. Thank you. And oh yeah, and if you want to support me even further, go ahead and follow my brand new anime podcast that I'm doing with Danny Mata, where me and him break down everything that happened in anime this week. This beef that I'm having with somebody whose name I don't know, very much included. It's on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. But before we get into that, guys, we got to talk about one of our favorite reoccurring sponsors to the page. You know them, you love them. It's Raid Shadow Legends. Listen, guys, you've heard me talk about Raid 100 times before. But what we're talking about with Raid today is much different than our usual ad read. See, while we're usually talking about the best in industry graphics or the 600 champions or the unlimited amount of ways that you can raid your way, today, we're talking about a Raid animated TV show, or I should say, a Raid animated limited series. Yes, that's right, Raid is getting an animated limited series called Raid, Call of the Arbiter, and there has never been a better way to get immersed in the world of Raid than this limited series. In fact, you can watch this limited series for free right now, as episode 1 of Raid Call of the Arbiter is out now, with new episodes coming out Thursday, 10 a.m. EST, every Thursday until July 20th. I watched episode 1, Gleck, and I gotta tell you, I had high hopes for the animation considering how beautiful Raid's game is, and the animation still blew me away. Not to mention, the score of the episode by Jesper Kid was an absolute dream to listen to. More than anything, I've never felt more immersed in the world of Raid. But Raid is actually going one step beyond this. Raid realized, maybe from my page, how much people love lore and background stories. So they're releasing lore and behind the scenes videos on their YouTube, which in conjunction with the limited series expands the world of Raid like we've never seen before. On top of this, Raid is trying to flesh out their lore even more by adding new champion bios that pertain to the Call of the Arbiter. Updated bios for people like Gleck, Aethel, or my favorite, Death Knight. So what are you guys waiting for? There's never been a better time to get into Raid. Everybody who logs onto Raid 7 days between now and July 24th will get a chance at getting Artok, one of the 5 new characters from the show, as a playable legendary character. So what are you guys waiting for? Use the link in my description or scan the QR code on the screen right now to download Raid today. If you do, you'll get insane bonuses like the Epic Champion, Knight Errant, and a ton of other useful things. Once you download it, you'll find me in there. This is my username. Make sure you add me. I'll see you in there, and we'll both get to raiding our way. So wars, while they are great at killing innocents and making orphans, they're also great at lofting men and women into the annals of history. And what's interesting about the majority of the Shinobi World Wars is that there was really no good or bad guys in them, just different countries battling for resources. Now, obviously, since we watch Naruto through the scope of Konoha's perspective, we think that Konoha are the good guys in every single war. However, if you look objectively at the things that Konoha has done over the course of its 100 or so years of existence, they're not exactly the good guys. But this neutral stance you can take into the Naruto world is kind of the beauty of the Naruto world. Yes, the Hidden Stone is overly aggressive and incredibly militant, and therefore were usually the opposing force of Konoha in the majority of the Shinobi World Wars. It is completely 100% canon that they were the true aggressors in the Third Great Shinobi World War. Sure, the Hidden Cloud is incredibly underhanded, and they feigned peace with Konoha in order to try and steal a Hyuga clan member, which caused the Hyuga clan incident, which caused Neji's father to die. Sure, the Hidden Mist Village was known as the Blood Mist Village for a couple of decades because they were just killing children left and right. And sure, the Hidden Sand had Rasa trying to create the perfect weapon with his child, and therefore he sealed a tailed beast into an infant in a pregnant woman's stomach, and then proceeded to treat that child like garbage. Konoha also massacred one of its strongest and oldest clans, basically created the Akatsuki, and had an underground organization creating assassination children. Now you can say,
Yeah, those were all things Danzo did, though.
who was Danzo doing it for? Now, the reason I'm bringing up the fact that every single village has been horrible at some point or another is because I believe when talking about the heroes of every great Shinobi World War, you need to talk about the heroes of every village. As like we've already stated, every single village had their own motivations. Therefore, understanding why each individual Great Shinobi World War broke out in the first place is really important when describing why individual people are heroes in the first place. Which leads us perfectly into talking about our first subject today, the First Great Shinobi World War. See, of all of the World Wars, the First Great Shinobi World War is probably the one we know the least about. We don't know a lot about any of the Great Shinobi World Wars, but we have context clues and characters and important battles that we know the names of from all the other wars. When it comes down to the First Great Shinobi World War, we don't have a whole lot of that. What we know is that in the lead up to the First Great Shinobi World War, there was a series of skirmishes between the great nations. But before we talk about that, we really have to take everything one step further back. Now, the reason there was border skirmishes between these big villages and small villages and other big villages against big villages is because the villages had just recently formed. See, Hashirama and Madara coming together to create Konoha was intimidating for everybody else. The Senju and the Uchiha were not only the strongest clans in what would soon be the Land of Fire, but probably in the entire world, as the Uchiha and the Senju have been hired for any kind of ninja work over the last 2,000 years. If you wanted to take over somebody's village, you would hire either the Senju or the Uchiha to help you take over the village. However, those who would live in the village would then hire whoever you didn't hire, and that's why the Senju and the Uchiha were always battling. A good real-life equivalent would be if two mega powers decided to come together. Let's say Russia and China just decided to be one country. The rest of the world would be like, should we start fusing? Which is essentially how every single Shinobi village was created. Upon seeing that Konoha had formed, all other villages began to pull in all the small clans that existed around them and made ninja villages. And whatever small territories that these small clans inhabited became what would soon be the Land of Fire, or the Land of Wind, or the Land of Lightning. And therefore your country only had the resources in the land that all of the small clans that you would use to create that ninja village had before forming. And this shook out for some villages a lot better than it did for others. Specifically, it shook out really well for Konoha, as the Land of Lightning is mountainous and oceanic, like Samoa or Hawaii, and the Land of Stone is scraggly and rocky, like the Rockies or Central Turkey. The Hidden Sand is just in a desert, and the Hidden Mist is just a collection of islands. The only people who really got a good shake territory-wise is the Land of Fire. They had trees, rolling fields, fertile land. And because of this, from the jump, Konoha was set to be the richest and most powerful country out of all. But at the same time, the formations of these countries happened rather quick, and therefore borders were kind of fuzzy, especially when you consider the fact that between all of these major countries existed a bunch of smaller countries, like the Land of Grass or the Land of Rain. But because some countries got a bad shake when it came to location, they began to take resources from adjacent countries, and this resulted in a ton of skirmishes along the borders of the great nations, at least is what we learned from Inoki. The first real example we see of this in the lead up to the First Great Shinobi World War is when Madara actually traveled all the way to Iwa, also known as the Hidden Stone, and he was there for one reason and one reason alone: to demand that the Hidden Stone be subservient to Konoha. Now obviously the Hidden Stone didn't listen, so Madara just beat up Mu and Inoki, and then just kind of dipped. Now Hashirama, seeing that there was a struggle for power between all of these hidden villages, realized there might be something he can do to fix it. Since Hashirama was sitting on the potential gold mine that was 9 tailed beasts, he realized that if all of the villages had their own respective tailed beasts, they wouldn't worry about resources and land as much, as the power of a tailed beast not only creates security, but also financial security. And if you figured, if everybody has tailed beasts, then nobody has tailed beasts. And he wanted to give them away. However, Tobirama didn't allow Hashirama to give away the tailed beasts, and instead demanded that all of the other villages pay for them. And while technically selling the tailed beast to all of the other villages did appease the skirmishes at the border for a little bit, it didn't solve the true root of the issue, Konoha was now even richer. Like 8-tailed beasts sold at an incredible price, richer. I guess they only sold 7 because technically the Land of Sand already had Shukak. However, while this power balance stopped smaller wars, it didn't stop the escalation. Sure, now the Hidden Stone had 2-tailed beasts doesn't mean they can eat rocks now, which means they still needed resources, and now they had the power to take them. And therefore, while handing out the tailed beasts stopped smaller wars, it started bigger wars, one of which Hashirama ends up dying in. How did he die? We don't really know. There's a couple of prevailing theories. People say that he fought for so long that eventually his chakra reserves dried up and he died. Others say since mitotic regeneration is actually based off of how Hashirama heals, his cells duplicated so many times from all of his battles against Madara that his life ended substantially before it should have. And some people say he just couldn't live without Madara. That's personally my favorite. And with Hashirama's death and Tobirama's inability to stop the oncoming war, we got our first Great Shinobi World War. Now, who was fighting in the first Great Shinobi World War? Well, technically, the only nations we have confirmed to have actually been battling in this war were the Hidden Cloud and the Hidden Leaf. But it's canonical knowledge that the first Great Shinobi World War devastated all 5 nations, so they were probably all in it. So in this war that affected all 5 great nations, who were the heroes? Well, since we don't know a whole lot about the war, we don't know a whole lot about the heroic acts. Pretty much all we know about the first Great Shinobi World War is that Hashirama dies before it starts and Tobirama dies in the middle. And it's from that and that alone that we can deem who the heroes of the war were. But when considering the heroes of this moment, you have to consider both sides. So this moment is obviously set up by the fact that Team Tobirama was on a mission in the Land of Lightning. However, while on this mission, they're attacked by Team Kinkaku. And while Team Tobirama's team was formidable, I mean, it was Tobirama, a prime Hiruzen, Danzo, Kagami Uchiha, who was said to possibly wield the Kodowa Matsukame. Kinkaku and Ginkaku are descendants of Hagoromo, pseudo Nine-Tails Jinchuriki, and they were said to have, I believe, 15 high-level Jonin with them. Therefore, instead of standing their ground against a superior force, Tobirama elects himself as a sacrifice to allow everybody else to get away. Well, that's not before he asks who wants to sacrifice themselves, and Hiruzen says he wants to, and therefore Tobirama selects him as the next Hokage, because Tobirama always had it in his brain that he would be the one who would stay behind, but he wanted to see who embodied the will of fire the most out of his team, and therefore whoever stood up would be elected as the next Hokage in his stead. Obviously, by Tobirama sacrificing himself here, people like Danzo and Hiruzen and Kagami Uchiha were able to return to the village. And while obviously people like Kagami Uchiha would live that long or would get killed by Itachi in the massacre, and Danzo would go on to basically be the worst person in Konoha's history, Hiruzen did do, contrary to popular belief, a lot of good. On the other side of things here, Kinkaku and Ginkaku are the heroes of the Hidden Cloud. See, technically, this wasn't the first time that Tobirama had gotten into a scuffle with the Gold and Silver Brothers. Tobirama had actually gone to the Hidden Cloud prior to sign a peace treaty that the Gold and Silver Brothers had interrupted, and they had attacked him, almost killing him. However, it was at this point that Kinkaku and Ginkaku were banished from the village because of the moment of insurrection of trying to stop a peace treaty being signed between the second Raikage and Tobirama. However, this doesn't necessarily track. See, when Kinkaku and Ginkaku are released in the Fourth Great Shinobi World War, Darui says it's an honor to meet them. He talks about how they're hailed as heroes in his village. On top of this, if Kinkaku and Ginkaku had actually been exiled from the Land of Lightning, why were they still fighting the war for the Land of Lightning? Where did they get the 15 to 20 Jonin who are jumping Team Tobirama with them? I think it's much more logical to assume, given what the Land of Lightning has done in moments like the Hyuga incident, to assume that Tobirama was invited to the Land of Lightning in an assassination attempt from the jump. And when that assassination attempt didn't go as planned, aka Tobirama survived, in order to save face, they made Kinkaku and Ginkaku the Fall Men, but reinstated them immediately once the Land of Fire and the Land of Lightning came back to war again in the First Great Shinobi World War. However, you know what they say, the second time's the charm, because Kinkaku and Ginkaku were able to get their grubby little mitts on Tobirama the second time around and kill him, which is probably why they are hailed as heroes to this day in the Land of Lightning. But considering the fact that that is basically the only conflict we know about from the First Great Shinobi World War, those are really the only heroes we can glean. Fortunately for us, though, we do know a substantial amount more about the Second Great Shinobi World War. The first thing we know about the Second War is who was involved. See, we know that the Hidden Sand, the Hidden Leaf, the Hidden Rain, and the Hidden Stone were all involved, and there's no evidence that the Hidden Mist or the Hidden Cloud were involved. So before we get into who the heroes of the Second Great Shinobi World War were, how did the Second Great Shinobi World War come to be? Well, let's look back on everything that we know about the First Great Shinobi World War and how it left the Naruto universe. We know that the First Great Shinobi World War happened because of economic disparity between the nations. And we know that after the conclusion of the First Great Shinobi World War, all 5 nations were left devastated. Every single nation lost at least 1 Kage, with most of them losing 2. But even though an armistice was signed after the conclusion of the First Great Shinobi World War, the problems that started it were never really fixed. The borders weren't moved, and now the countries that were dealing with economic disparity before were devastated. But you know what country was fully primed for recovering from a war? Konoha, mostly because they were the richest and most powerful country going into the First Great Shinobi World War, and also because they had just sold seven-tailed beasts. With a fortune amassed from selling seven-tailed beasts, they were able to rebuild Konoha in no time at all, meaning the economic disparity had gotten worse for the four countries destroyed through the First Great Shinobi World War, but Konoha had taken another step forward. And therefore, after 20 years of peace, the smaller nations began to make treaties with each other in order to expand their countries. So the Second Great Shinobi World War started in a very similar capacity to the First Great Shinobi World War because none of the problems that caused the First Great Shinobi World War have been fixed yet. And while I would say that morally the Second Great Shinobi World War is the most ambiguous out of all of the wars, and therefore claiming anybody from this war to be a hero of any sort is kind of a stretch, there was some people who stood out. The first person that comes to my mind is Sakamo Hatake. See, Sakamo Hatake gained his title, the White Fang, during the Second Great Shinobi World War, when he led an offensive campaign into the Hidden Sand. At least, this is where we think he gained his moniker, because we know for a fact that Sasori's parents were killed by Sakamo, because Granichio holds a grudge against him to this day. And considering the fact that everybody considered Sakamo Hatake to be stronger than the three legendary Sannin combined, when it comes for heroes to Konoha in the Second Great Shinobi World War, he's basically it. Now I know what you're saying. You're saying,
Nick, what about the legendary Sannin? Didn't they lead an offensive campaign into the Hidden Rain?
I mean, they did, where they proceeded to get absolutely clowned. They led a battalion of Konoha Shinobi into the Hidden Rain, and they were the only three left standing, to the point where Hanzo gave him a nickname, spun him around, and said, all right, see you later. To say that either Jiraiya or Orochimaru were war heroes in the Second Great Shinobi World War is a stretch, especially when you consider the fact that Konoha was an aggressive force against a smaller country that got destroyed in the midst of their battle. At least Sakamo was fighting against an actual hidden village. I mean, sure, Sakamo was also making orphans just like the legendary Sannin, but such is war, baby. But if you were legitimately gonna give a war hero status to any of the legendary Sannin in the Second Great Shinobi World War, it wouldn't be Jiraiya or Orochimaru, it would be Tsunade. And not because of what she accomplished in the Hidden Rain, but because of what she accomplished outside of the Hidden Rain. See, like we've already established, Konoha wasn't just fighting the Hidden Rain, they were also fighting the Hidden Sand. And the person who was carrying the Hidden Sand on their back at this moment was Granichio. See, the real power of Granichio was the amount of poison she could formulate. And because every new poison that she formulated was a new poison, there was no cure for it. That was until Tsunade came around. See, Tsunade became a legendary medical ninjutsu user during the Second Shinobi World War, where one of the most important things she did as it pertains to the war effort was counteracting all of the poisons of Granichio, therefore minimizing the amount of casualties that Konoha would have sustained by thousands, if not tens of thousands. It's a possibility that Tsunade was actually right there beside Sakamo on the offensive in Suna, an offensive that wouldn't have gone nearly as well if Tsunade wasn't there to counteract the poisons of Granichio. Outside of this, because Tsunade was so incredible as a medical ninjutsu user and the Second Great Shinobi World War, she reinvented what a three-man team would look like, as Konoha realized that having a medical ninjutsu specialist and every three-man team greatly improved the efficiency of that three-man team. And thus Tsunade literally turned the Shinobi world on its head. And since Konoha were the first people to come to this realization, it propelled Konoha to an even higher status of power, as now their three-man team were operating at a higher level of efficiency and strength, which gave them an even further leg up on all of the surrounding countries. But on the other side of that same coin, while Tsunade was considered a hero of the leaf, Granichio was considered a hero of the sand. And this makes sense because, like I've stated, she was objectively the only person worth anything when it came to offensive ability in the Hidden Sand for almost 6 decades. I mean, yeah, the Hidden Sand got Sasori, who was around for like 2 or 3 years, and then they got Gaara when Granichio was, what, 85? But all of the years prior to Sasori or Gaara, Granichio was putting the entirety of her village on her back. Not to mention that we know for a fact that Chiyu and Hanzo, the salamander, have battled before, which means at some point, most likely during the Second Great Shinobi World War, Granichio went toe-to-toe with the man who took out the 3 legendary Sannin and survived. Meaning, outside of fighting a defensive battle in their own country, Granichio was also probably mounting an offensive in the Hidden Rain. Well, obviously, the Second Great Shinobi World War didn't amount to much for Suna. Without Granichio, they probably would have been wiped off the map entirely. So even though a lot of her poisons were being foiled by Tsunade, she is absolutely the MVP for Suna in the Second Great Shinobi World War. But once again, in a war that was mostly focused on ravaging small countries, there's not a whole lot of heroes. Fortunately, the Third Great Shinobi World War was less focused on the small countries. See, outside of the Fourth Great Shinobi World War, we know the most about the Third Great Shinobi World War, and we know with 100% certainty that every single country was involved. The reason that the Third Great Shinobi World War happened is because in the wake of the Second Great Shinobi World War, smaller countries realized,
Oh, We stand a chance.
Riding on the back and the influence of Hanzo the Salamander and the Hidden Rain's ability to repel not only Konoha but also Suna simultaneously, the reign that the 5 major countries had over the smaller countries along their borders began to crumble. And as these smaller countries became more and more emboldened by possible victories and possible riches they could win against these larger countries, smaller scale skirmishes along the borders blew up into much larger wars, until eventually the small countries pulled all of the big countries into one continent-wide war. And it's assumed that the Third Great Shinobi World War is probably the longest out of all of the Shinobi Wars, as even great and powerful countries like Konoha were forced to put genin on the battlefield. And you don't start putting the genin on the battlefield until you're out of jonin and chunin. Now technically this was also the case in the Second Great Shinobi World War, because we know Tsunade's little brother was sent off to war as a genin, but the practice not only seemed much more common, but also much more socially acceptable in the Third Great Shinobi World War, as Fugaku even brought Itachi, who was 4 years old, out to a battlefield even though the battle was technically over. Now in the Third Great Shinobi World War, it was basically everybody versus Konoha, which, considering the motivations for the first 2 Shinobi World Wars, this kind of makes sense. The only people who were not entirely sure if they were fighting against Konoha or not is Suna, the Hidden Sand. See, we know that the Hidden Sand was involved in the Third Great Shinobi World War because we know that Sasori gained his nickname, Sasori of the Red Sand, in the Third Great Shinobi World War. But the title Sasori of the Red Sand implies that Sasori was fighting on sand, which tells us that the Hidden Sand was most likely fighting a defensive battle. And we know that the Hidden Mist and Konoha were battling because the Hidden Mist kidnapped Rin and put Isobu into her, hoping that she would Trojan horse back into Konoha, lose control of Isobu, and then Isobu would destroy Konoha. We also know that Konoha and the Land of Lightning were battling because we saw a battle between Minato A and Killer B. But the true most important battle happening in the Third Great Shinobi World War, at least for our perspective, was Konoha versus Iwa, or the Hidden Stone. See, this battle between Konoha and Iwa is one of the more devastating conflicts in the history of Naruto, and it's actually one that Konoha wasn't winning for a long time. See, this battle between these 2 military mights was taking place in the Land of Grass, where Karin is from, and therefore the Land of Grass was being used in a very similar capacity to the Hidden Rain was in the Second Great Shinobi World War, except they didn't have a man on a salamander. The tides didn't begin to shift for Konoha in this battle until the Kanabi Bridge mission. Now, this is the mission where Obito, Rin, Kakashi, and technically Minato went to go destroy a bridge. The reason I say kind of Minato is because Minato wasn't with his team. He was needed on the front lines, and therefore it was decided that Kakashi, who was currently a Jonin, and Obito and Rin, who are currently Chunin, should be enough to go to Kanabi Bridge to destroy it. However, they weren't. They got jumped by a bunch of Iwa Shinobi who were like full-grown adults. And you know the story from here. Kakashi gets his eye slashed, Obito pushes Kakashi out of the way, gets smushed, Kakashi takes his other eye. Everybody thinks, oh no, Obito's dead. Kakashi and Rin go back to the village, they're heroes, and Minato shows up at the last minute to save them. But regardless of the downstream repercussions of the Kanabi Bridge mission, also known as the Fourth Great Shinobi World War, the Kanabi Bridge mission quite literally turned the tide of the war. See, by destroying this bridge, Iwa could no longer get its troops and supplies into the Land of Grass. And by cutting off that very vital transportation line, Iwa could no longer hold the Land of Grass, which allowed Konoha to launch a counterattack. And after Iwa was pushed back and pacified, Konoha could focus on all of the other opponents. And from that point on, began to systematically destroy every single country they were still up against. And therefore, because of the destruction of Kanabi Bridge, Team 7 are absolutely heroes of the Third Great Shinobi World War. But that isn't Team 7 or Team Minato's last entry on this list. By a long shot, Minato was also very obviously Konoha's hero. Even though he wasn't as involved in the Kanabi Bridge mission as the rest of his team, Minato was an absolute menace during the Third Great Shinobi World War, such a degree that he was constantly needed on the front lines and received a run-on-site order. Not to mention, in a filler episode, but I like to consider this canon because it's fun, after Konoha and Iwa signed an armistice claiming that the war was over between the two of them, Iwa thought, nice, now that we've lulled them into a false sense of security, let's send 1,000 shinobi to Konoha to take it over while they don't expect an attack. However, instead of having 1,000 Iwa shinobi waltz into Konoha and take it over while no one's on guard, Konoha just sent one person, Minato. And Minato proceeded to kill 1,000 Iwa shinobi by himself. Can you imagine how terrifying that would be? Imagine being the last 50, 20, 10, one guy. I'm telling you, if there's 1,000 of us and only 300 die to one guy and he's still going, I'm gone. If you can kill 100 people out of 1,000 and you're still going, you're probably gonna make your way to me eventually. Minato was thought to be such a hero that he was the logical choice for the 4th Hokage when Hiruzen stepped down after the conclusion of the Third War, which actually brings me to what's gonna be a relatively unpopular opinion here. Hiruzen was undoubtedly one of the largest heroes of the Third Great Shinobi World War. Was he out on the battlefield cracking heads? I mean, probably. We never see it, but most likely. But the real reason that Hiruzen is one of the true MVPs of the Third Great Shinobi World War isn't what he did during the war, but after it. See, like I said, the Third Great Shinobi World War was basically Konoha versus everyone. And as the war entered its closing arc, Konoha was looking really good. Konoha had foiled the Hidden Mist's attempt to get Isobu into the middle of their village. The Hidden Cloud had just lost the 3rd Raikage. One man had just killed 1,000 Iwa Shinobi. And the Hidden Sand was the Hidden Sand. They'd never been intimidating. Because of this, there were groups of people in Konoha who believed that Konoha should push the offensive. Now that we've beaten back all of these countries, it's our chance to take over the continent. And objectively, they were correct. If ever there was a time to push an offensive front on all the other nations, the conclusion of the Third Great Shinobi World War was it. Still had Jiraiya, still had Tsunade, still had Orochimaru, still had Minato, still had Hiruzen. If they wanted to, they probably could have taken over the continent. But Hiruzen didn't want any more war. He didn't want the blood of any shinobi from any village on his hands any longer. And therefore, in order to satiate the bloodthirst of these radical groups, Hiruzen decided to step down as 3rd Hokage, and therefore take all of the ire of these groups onto himself. Make him and him alone solely responsible for every soul lost in the Third Great Shinobi World War. And while some could make the argument that if Hiruzen pushed the offensive against all these other countries, he could have unified the continent long before the 4th Great Shinobi World War, that unification would have resulted in hundreds of thousands of deaths. So he's almost definitely a hero of the 3rd Great Shinobi World War to me. But there was also a lot of heroes of the 3rd Great Shinobi World War outside of Konoha, one of which whose name we've already brought up, the 3rd Raikage. The 3rd Raikage died during the 3rd Great Shinobi World War, but not without good cause. If you thought Tobirama's final stand against Kinkaku and Ginkaku was probably legendary, wait until you hear about the 3rd Raikage. See, the Hidden Cloud had launched an offensive campaign against somewhere. It's never explicitly stated, though the people they're fighting do look like they're from Iwa, and geographically that kind of makes sense. However, this offensive hadn't gone well, and now this force that had been deployed from the Hidden Cloud was trying to retreat back to the Hidden Cloud. However, on their tails were 10,000 probably Iwa Shinobi, and those 10,000 probably Iwa Shinobi were gonna catch them long before they got to the Hidden Cloud, which is why the 3rd Raikage elected to stay behind so the force that was retreating could make it back. It's at this point that the 3rd Raikage took a stand. For 3 days, 72 hours. And for those 3 days, he fought against these 10,000 shinobi. And it was through the combined use of his perfect shield, his lightning cloak, and his perfect spear, his hell stab, that he was able to take the majority of this force with him. Now, we're not entirely sure how the 3rd Raikage dies. That is to say, it's never been explicitly stated. However, the fact that he's brought back with a scar in his Edo Tensei form, and that Naruto deduces that this scar is from having his own hell stab redirected back at him, as the hell stab seems the only thing sharp enough to pierce his lightning cloak. Now, obviously, he sustained this scar in a battle against Gyuki, which is actually very genuinely impressive. He was able to battle against the Ten Tails one-on-one to basically a draw, and the only damage he sustained was a self-inflicted wound that became his life shade. But what I'm building at here is that the only way that these 10,000 shinobi could ever cut down the 3rd Raikage is if he accidentally did this again or just ran out of chakra, and the latter is probably the more likely. But still, being able to hold back a force of 10,000 shinobi for 3 days to cover a retreat is definitely hero material. But what about the country that was probably battling against the 3rd Raikage in this battle? What about the Hidden Stone? We've never really talked about a hero from their village. And that's because if we're being real, the Hidden Stone's true strength is the amount of shinobi they have and how dedicated to the Hidden Stone they are. They're kind of like Russia in World War II. They just throw numbers at any problem. The 3rd Great Shinobi World War is really the first war where we see a definitive hero from Iwa. And that definitive hero was Han. Now, for those of you who don't know, Han is the Jinchuriki of the Five Tails, Kukyo. And it was during the 3rd Great Shinobi World War that Han became world famous for the technique that he uses in combination with Kukyo's power, steam-powered ninjutsu. And it was with the power of this steam-powered ninjutsu that Han became the world's fastest taijutsu user. And considering the fact that this man is 7 foot tall, him being the world's fastest taijutsu user in a world where Might Guy is very much active is terrifying. Now, as for what he did in the 3rd Great Shinobi World War, we don't know. It's kind of similar to the Sakamo Hatake situation. The war just made him famous, and therefore he was probably messing people up pretty bad. And speaking of people who got nicknames during the 3rd Great Shinobi World War, if we head on over to Suna, we'll have Sasori. See, technically calling Sasori a hero in anything is kind of a stretch, because even if he did become Sasori of the Red Sand during the 3rd Great Shinobi World War because of how well he protected Suna, he was more likely than not taking the bodies of the people he killed and turning them into puppets. And I guess all's fair in love and war, right? But honestly, I think Suna probably wouldn't mind that so long as their entire country didn't get washed by Konoha. And sorcery afforded them that luxury. And I mean, sure, would he eventually leave the village and kill the third Kazekage and turn him into a puppet? Yeah. But within the confines of the Third Great Shinobi World War, Sasori was absolutely a hero of Suna, one that Great Ichigo was rather proud of. And just unfortunately, didn't last long. And then to go to the final country that Konoha was battling against in the Third Great Shinobi World War, we head to the Hidden Mist. See, the Hidden Mist also doesn't have much in the way of heroes. The history is a long, tired, and bloody one. However, if there was one ray of sunshine that came out of the massive amount of bloodshed that the Hidden Mist had gone through over decades, it was Ao. You see, during the Third Great Shinobi World War, Ao came into combat against a Hyuga, and this Hyuga must have been a member of the main branch, because Ao goes on to kill this Hyuga member and steal their Byakugan. Now, if hypothetically Ao had killed a member of the side branch, the curse mark on their forehead would have sealed away their Byakugan forever. It's a possibility that Ao yanked out his Byakugan while he was still alive, but either way, it doesn't really make that much of a difference. All that matters is that after this battle, Ao became known as the Byakugan Killer, and he began to wield a Byakugan for the good of the Hidden Mist Village. And one of the first things he did was activate his Byakugan while in the presence of Yagura, the current Mizukage. And upon activating his Byakugan in the presence of Yagura, he saw that his chakra network was disturbed. But not like Yagura was having a bad day, no, disturbed like Yagura was under genjutsu. And it was with the use of this Byakugan that he acquired during the Third Great Shinobi World War that Ao was able to finally deduce that Yagura was being placed under a genjutsu that trumped up his bloodlust. And therefore, after years of being Obito's puppet, Yagura was finally set free, and the Hidden Mist Village would no longer be known as the Blood Mist Village, as the tyrannical reign of Yagura that wasn't even really Yagura's fault was over. This action might seem inconsequential, but imagine if Obito had been able to control the Hidden Mist Village all the way through the Fourth Great Shinobi World War. Imagine if the Hidden Mist Village had still been the Blood Mist Village. They probably wouldn't have participated in the Fourth Great Shinobi World War. So because of this, Ao is most definitely a hero of the Third Great Shinobi World War. But if we're being entirely real, when it comes down to it, there's only one person who needs to appear on this list 2 times, and that is none other than Rin. See, Rin deserves to be on this list 2 times because of what she accomplished in the Kanami Bridge mission, and also because what she achieved after she was taken by the Hidden Mist Village. See, it was Rin who put herself in front of Kakashi's Chidori. It was Rin who elected to have her back blown out by Kakashi, and if we're being honest, who wouldn't elect to have that? And it was because Rin elected to die at the hands of Kakashi that Isobu wasn't set wild in Konoha. So even though Rin was kind of useless as a ninja, she was unequivocally the biggest hero of the Third Great Shinobi World War, especially as it pertains to Konoha. Now for the Fourth Great Shinobi World War, you guys know who the heroes were. You watched it. It was Sakura and Naruto and Sasuke and Orochimaru and Might Guy and Kakashi and Minato and Hashirama and Tobirama. But if you say,
oh, I think Obito deserves to be on the list,
I will strangle you.
but he sacrificed himself in the end.
The war wouldn't have started without him. So yeah, it's Orochimaru for bringing back the Hokage because they were very needed in the battle. It's Naruto and Sasuke for getting powers from Ninja Sky Daddy and sealing Kaguya. It's Sakura for battling against Kaguya without Sage of Six Pass chakra and also manually pumping Naruto's heart to keep him alive. It's Might Guy, Minato, and Kakashi for kicking a hole in Madara that weakened him so he wasn't at his full strength when Naruto and Sasuke fought him. That's basically it. Like obviously Gaara and the Sealing Corps are also very important in sealing away a lot of the Endo Tensei Shinobi. But I mean, if we're handing out flowers for doing that, then the heroes list is just every single character in Naruto. Ooh, also Itachi deserves to be on the list. No Itachi, no Kabuto releasing Edo Tensei, even though Madara resisted it, so it really didn't end up doing that much in the first place, considering the fact that most of the ninjas who were brought back were already sealed. And yeah, that's it. All of the heroes of every single world war in Naruto. Who do you guys think the real heroes of these wars were? Tell me in the comments below. And while you guys are down there, please, for me, like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell.